Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery and I'm preparing to feed a bin. I got a little drawing here I figured I'd share with you before I get started. And it's a pretty complicated drawing, I'll admit. And the bin that we're going to be working on is just the one that you see down here in this lower corner. It's the bin which on my spreadsheet is listed as number 94, project number 94. And it's got what we estimated to be 100, no, not 100, 1,599, pretty much 1,600 worms are what are estimated to live in that system. That's the box that's right down here. Not the one in the corner, the one that's right next to it. And the other bin that we built, using the same worms that populated the bin we're going to feed today, is right next to it. So that one was launched 51 days ago. It's already been fed a few times, but the bin that we created with the second and final haul out of the worms, out of the older container, is now 18 days old, but has not been fed other than getting some food placed into it even before the worms arrived. The donor bin from which both of these systems were populated with is the one that still sits down here on the ground. I've not yet removed the castings from it, but that's basically all that remains in there now that the worms have been moved out. And I just figured I'd try to come up with this concept of sort of a storyline as to, hey, where'd those worms in those two bins come from? Oh, they came out of this system. Where'd that system come from? Well, it came from outside. It was originally the worms that lived in my outdoor worm bag. And, well, where'd that come from? Blah, blah, blah. So I've been thinking of trying to stitch together some stories so that I can articulate the life cycle of these worms as they move from bin to bin, and I can trace them back to their origin. But just another little thing I've been thinking of trying to do. What do you think? Is it worth my effort? Would it be interesting? Would it help put things in context? Either way. Let's get that bin up on the bench and get them fed. For a new bin, this system's got a lot of material in it. I've got a shredder now that really does a wonderful job, unlike my old piece of junk shredder. So I've been really generous on the bedding, and that includes my new systems. You know what? I've been removing cardboard coverings from most of my systems lately. I think we're going to do the same here, because it seems like when I flip over the cardboard coverings on my systems, I always find these fruit flies or gnats or whatever the heck they are hanging out underneath. And I'm starting to think that if I can maybe do away with these little hiding spots for them, then maybe we'll eventually get them to leave. Worst comes to worst, I'm getting my bug zapper and going to run it down here for a while, see if I can get rid of them. Now, it looks like we preemptively placed a coffee filter in here that we could use to show ourselves where we last fed. It's what I usually do. I usually use something to indicate where we last fed. So here we've got a centipede. If it was a millipede, I wouldn't bother, because millipedes are generally seen as a helper creature in your worm bins. Centipedes, on the other hand, are predatory and they will prey on worms, so I squash them when I see them. There's a good amount of moisture in here, I gotta admit. And I'm glad, because, you know, after 18 days out here with not even one check-in, I wasn't quite sure what to expect. Good thing for that bubble wrap, keeping things nice and damp in here. And I probably launched the system with a good bit of moisture as well. So this all these castings on top might be a little bit deceiving. The reason it looks that way is not because these worms have been hard at work creating all these castings here. These castings came over with the worms when we did the final haul out. And my method of getting the worms rounded up out of their old home is to create a portion of the bin that they're living in that I track them over to, and then not only do I remove the worms, but I remove all the material that they're inhabiting too, as well as any leftover foods and stuff. So I've got a good number of castings already in this system, even though it's a fairly new system. But I'm going to blend them in, I think, because I think that's, I don't know, just the way I want it. I like to see the castings that are growing over time relative to a previous check-in, or maybe I'll review the video from the previous time and then I could visually say, hey, yeah, over those couple weeks there is a notable difference in the number of castings that are piling up. And I don't want to have castings that were transplanted into here, you know, altering my perception of how many castings have been actually created here. So as I roam around, I see worms hanging out all over the place. There was probably some food that came along with the worms that they'd not yet consumed from the from the collection area in their old system when I hauled it all out and moved them in here. So there might be a little bit of leftovers left. I don't know, 18 days later, maybe not too much. And I'm pretty sure that what I put into the bin as kind of like a pre-feeding or just some food that was placed into the bin prior to the launch of the worms, I believe it was pumpkin. And that's actually what I've got for them today. I went out into the outside freezer and I grabbed a pretty good size portion of pumpkin for these little guys. And not only that, but I've got some bedding that I want to test out. It's some stuff that's been laying around in my yard for quite some time now. It's twine. It's the twine that I use to set up my tomato hooks. Because I like to grow my tomatoes as single stem or like two stem type plants, and I run them up a string using those tomato clips. I don't know, I could be talking gibberish to somebody that doesn't really do any gardening, but basically every year the UV light of the sunshine beats up the string on those little tomato hooks that I created. So if I try to use the same setup the next year, as soon as the tomatoes start growing and you put a little bit of weight on that twine on the second year, it just breaks because it's not very tough stuff, and the UV does seem to break it down. Well, not only that, I've tried using stuff that's just been sitting in the garage for a couple years, and then that stuff couldn't handle any weight either. So I think it just degrades over time, with or without UV light. I think it loses its strength. So I do replace the twine on my tomato hooks every year. Otherwise, I can just anticipate having all my plants dropping to the ground once they start to develop a little bit of extra weight. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, with 18 days elapsed and a pretty good sized worm population living in here, it is possible that some of the castings that we're seeing in here are actually ones that were created here, not just bought over from elsewhere. But this is kind of a nice head start for this system to already have a good number of castings within it. And the fact that we're blending it all in now, I think, is just going to help. It'll just probably create more material that the worms feel really, really comfortable cruising around in. Because, I mean, if you come up on a big pile of, you know, sterile paper and there's no food in there, why would a worm want to go in there? I would think that they'd feel a little bit more comfortable in stuff that's, you know, maybe more castings. I don't know. I really don't know for sure, but I just thought it would be nice to sort of blend everything together a little bit, mix it all in, but at the same time it gives us a chance to kind of inspect how things are doing in here. I really didn't expect to see any leftovers of that pumpkin that was placed in here prior to the worms being launched into it. I figured that stuff would get gobbled up quite quickly. And if there was any food that came over with the worms as leftovers from their previous bin, I would imagine that that stuff probably got consumed pretty rapidly as well. So this bin is probably due for a feeding. I was just looking at the amount of stuff that I bought down here, as far as not only just a lot of pumpkin, but also a pretty good wad of twine that I want to stick down in here too. So I think I'm going to kind of excavate the entire middle of the bin and open up the entire spot so that I can hopefully fit it all in and then still have room enough to cover up with. It's kind of weird, you know. I mean, usually it's in my older systems that I feel like I'm running out of room and I'm unable to stack stuff up because of I'm already at the rim, but already at the rim here. I don't know. It just seems like a good way to try to promote breeding is by giving the worms a lot of space to roam in. So I've been more recently trying to build slightly larger bins into which I'm launching my worms. So let's get the bedding over here. I bought it from outside. Besides the twine collection, I've also got a couple failed attempts at germinating some seeds here. I've already got another batch of them soaking in water. Hopefully I'll get some sprouts and then I can get my garden started. But this was kind of false start number one. So I'm just composting the bad seeds in the paper towel on which I tried germinating them. And we're going to include it as bedding for this feeding. So we've got a pretty good pile of twine over here, and I've got pretty much the same amount still sitting on my tomato hooks from last year. When I took the garden apart last year, I did not unwind all the old twine that was on those. So if they like it and they start eating the stuff up, I've got more where that came from. I got another amount pretty much equal to this that I can bring down here and give them if they like it. So we'll see. I'm hoping that they do. And here's the pumpkin. So I'm going to just pour it in so I don't talk myself out of giving them all of it. It is quite a bit. Wow, look at all that. And since it's frozen, I am glad that I excavated the hole out so there's no wormies right below it getting their butts frozen off. So some of it is not only just chunks of the pumpkin itself, but there was all of this inner stuff that all the seeds are connected to. So I separated all the seeds, but all that gooey stuff was thrown in here along with the chopped up bits of pumpkin. And I think that that stuff's going to be pretty popular too. Here's some more of it. So that is a really generous feeding. But you know, with this stuff having been frozen, and now as it thaws, it's just going to kick out a whole bunch of moisture. And if you were to come back in here in an hour from now and one of these is thawed out and you squeeze it, if we were to squeeze all the water out of all of these, there wouldn't be a whole lot left. So it might be a little bit deceiving because I believe it is in large part just water. So this system's going to get nice and damp. But you know what? Before we cover up here, one more thing. I'm going to sprinkle in a little bit of this crushed eggshell. When you're feeding your worms, you don't have to do it every time, but it's usually suggested that you help them out by providing them with some sort of a coarse, fine material to serve as the grit that they need to consume. Because when they break stuff down in their gizzards, they don't do it with stomach acids and stuff the way you and I do in our stomachs. The gizzard works a little differently. Like in the birds have gizzards too. They also digest their foods the same way by the gizzard taking those rough little bits of material and grinding it up against the food that's coming in and needs to be broken down. So it's kind of a mechanical breakdown process versus chemical. So look at all the material in this system. I got a feeling that this pumpkin is not going to last. There is a lot of worms in here. Everywhere I looked, there was worms. The only problem is when you're dealing with a whole bunch of confetti like this everywhere, the worms really blend in. I mean, if this system was, near its end and it was mainly castings, the worms would be a lot easier to spot in this material, but they're kind of camouflaged for now. So hopefully the next time we come in here, we'll be able to spot a good number of them feasting on this pumpkin. All right, so feeding number 2, technically, but the first feeding that these worms have received since they've been living in this container, and hopefully they enjoy it. I don't think that they were hungry. I think they probably had a fair bit of stuff in here that they could have been nibbling on while they were waiting for this second feeding. Uh-oh, I see a little worm that seems to be camped out on our top covering piece of paper. I didn't see him on this colorful piece of paper. It was blending in. Luckily the coffee filter was resting on top of him, keeping him sheltered from the bright lights and the dry air. So I'm going to hold off on putting that last covering, that cardboard on. I think we'll be good with just this top covering newspaper and this bubble wrap. And then we'll let it continue as is. So that's it for our first technical check-in on one of my newest bins. This 18-day red wiggler system with a supposed 1,599 worms living in it. And I don't know, maybe we'll check back in here another 7 or 10 days. It might not be necessary to wait too long with these little guys to check in to see how they're doing, because I got a feeling they're hungry, and I got a feeling that this pumpkin's going to be popular. All right, everyone, that's it for today's video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please remember to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always very much appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel too. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching.